Then one of my friends said that she encountered the Strengths Finder in the workplace in a community mental health center, and everybody did it all at once, and then they did some reflection on like what their strengths are and what felt authentic about that, and then the way the work was distributed. They kind of just talked about it and shifted things around, and she said
Oh,
it transformed the organization immensely for the better.
oh, that is powerful. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hope that makes it to the show. Might need to add a little extra clip. That's significant right there. That's how it should be.
I'm Nick Hernandez, and you're listening to the Positivity Matters podcast. We focus on well being, its theoretical foundations, research on it, and the lived experience itself. I recently saw the documentary My Omaha, where I met Leo Lewis II, who is my guest on the show today. Leo, thank you for being on the show.
Hey, you're welcome, Nick.
Tell us a little bit about this documentary and what that was like. And before that, maybe tell us a little bit about you.
Got you. Well, my name is Leo Lewis II. I'm born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, or the land we call Omaha, Nebraska. There were plenty of people here before this city was founded, but yep, I'm human and I serve my community as a community organizer, as a father, as a person who just wants to see better in Omaha, and especially for Black people in the diaspora, and essentially being able to make positive change for the entire city and eventually the nation and the world if we can. And so that's a little bit about me, and there'll be more that'll unfold as we continue this conversation. So in my work in community, I would organize community forums and town hall meetings through the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation, which is where I was volunteering at from approximately 2009 all the way up until as recent as 2024, in which when I ended my volunteer service at the Malcolm X Foundation, I was the board chair of the organization as of December of 2024, and then I resigned from that position. And so I spent a good deal of time with the organization. But while I was with the organization, it allowed me to learn more not only about myself, but more about the community and the needs of the community. And so when issues would take place, especially in North Omaha, that were sometimes high profile, and sometimes they were just a common need among a group of people, and I would bring those people together and we'd host forums and events and even organize efforts to change some of the issues or bring light to issues that were affecting groups of people and that they were looking for solutions. So I created space for community to create solutions. And in that process, I ran into Nick Boulier, who was a film student at the time back in 2015. And he wanted to do a documentary about Omaha, Nebraska and the tale of two Omahas, how Northeast Omaha, which was a predominantly Black community at the time, was going through a lot of social, still goes through a lot of social issues that tend to go unaddressed publicly by the city of Omaha as a whole. And then how there is the suburban Omaha, which when it has issues, those things aren't really publicized as much. And it doesn't seem to have as many social ills or social problems that are publicized. And so when Nick discovered me, he discovered me at the height of organizing and doing a lot of bringing people together to talk about these issues that I talked about earlier. And so he asked me would I participate in his documentary. And at the time, I said, sure, because you can follow me around, but I'm not necessarily interested in like sitting down and doing interviews and all those things. So it was a challenge for Nick because I wasn't the the most willing participant. And
Mm-hmm.
I challenged him on the idea that if you're going to shoot a documentary, make sure that it is well thought out, that you get both sides of the story, and that it's not exploitation of my community, where you come in, you film some of the worst parts of people's grieving and struggles, and then you disappear. and he kept his word. And so he actually, what I thought was going to be a 1 or 2 year project, it turned into almost 10 years worth of him filming. He put about 8 years into filming and documenting and just really paying attention to the work that I was doing and other people in the community was doing. And then he produced a really great documentary, My Omaha. So that's the short of how the My Omaha documentary came about and my participation in
Wow, that's an incredible condensation of 8 years.
it.
um, I think of things like this. I don't know exactly the term to give it. I kind of like this term generativity, and it's like doing things for the well-being of future generations. I kind of think of it as the mentoring, seeing positive potential and trying to turn it into reality. And that it feels like this is one of those things, like a kind of a generative story that's been created with this documentary that I'm guessing is going to open up a lot of room for conversation, maybe that is not necessary wouldn't have necessarily happened were it not for something like this to come along. It it has that feel to me. I don't know what the experience is like of being in the film and privy to the community conversations that are taking place around it. What has that been like for you since this documentary came out and the conversations you've had?
It's been great. It also has been a surprise, I should say, more than anything, because as a person who's doing the work or a person who's in the community, who's just kind of head down, focused on the work, I've been really dedicated to what I believe my mission is. And so when Nick would come in and he would film, we'd have our conversations, but I never anticipated it to open up the doors or open up more opportunities for other conversations. I didn't anticipate that happening. I anticipated, like I said from the beginning, that it would be more of an exploitation and then folks would kind of disappear. And actually, the
Mm.
opposite is taking place. More people are taking interest. More people are saying, wow, I didn't know these conversations were happening. I didn't know that you did this type of work, especially those who were unfamiliar with the work that I was doing in Northeast Omaha and the people like me who were doing in Northeast Omaha. And so it's been opening up a lot more opportunities for conversations. A lot more people are becoming more aware that there are people who are trying to solve social problems and change conditions in communities that seem to go overlooked. And so
Mm.
it's been a really good experience.
That's that's awesome. That's the kind of thing that I think is the best that one can hope for in their work. So,
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
definitely.
yeah. All right. So, aside from the resolution of problems, it and of the various outcomes that you hope for, there's like specific situations where it sounds like you help find solutions, like you mentioned, and the world of community, it's like to me it seems like it's not community is not a problem to be solved, but like a dream to be built and lived.
Mm, right on.
What do you feel along those lines? I know you're a vision driven person. There's a shot in the documentary where it where I see the words written out about vision. Would you tell me a little bit about that and where that came from and what is the vision currently?
Right on. I appreciate that question. Yeah, and I like what you talked about. Community is kind of a dream to be built. And I think that's where certain communities, especially communities that have struggled with hardship or levels of oppression, those communities have to start where they are. And we often have to start where we are, which is we're having an uphill battle against some type of either injustice or being behind the ball in an area where equity is not always there and it's not always fair. And so when we start from that place where we're behind the ball, then what ends up happening is it is the solving of the problem that often brings us together. And that's where we get a sense of community because we're achieving progress building something that is going to relieve the pressure or the stress or the issue that we're up against. I'll give you a good example of that, which is I had a nephew who had just got out of kindergarten. He's in his first couple of weeks of first grade. So he takes kindergarten behavior into his first grade role, which is play fighting and wrestling with the other boys in the class. Well, that turned into a suspension for him. And him being an African American boy, what we found out was that statistically, African American boys specifically are more likely to be suspended from school than any other ethnic or racial group. And he was the victim of that. So he was suspended twice for play fighting in school. Now, play fighting starts off as a bunch of kids pushing and shoving and wrestling, and then of course somebody does something that makes the other kid mad, and then they get a little serious, and that's where the schools find it to be a serious offense, which that's understandable. However, what happens is the schools didn't provide at the time the schools wasn't providing corrective action for that particular age group. So what we call restorative justice was not a go-to practice for the public school system. And so when I started asking around to other parents, was this an issue? It just became a outpour of parents who were saying, yes, this is an issue. And I went and talked to daycares and they said, yes, this is an issue. We got children who are suspended right now at our daycare. We got children who are being kicked out of school now. And these are pre-K, kindergarten, first graders, and second graders. So when we started to discover that that was a challenge, I started hosting town hall meetings and forums to bring parents together. And ultimately, I wanted to bring teachers and parents together. And the district, specifically the teachers union, didn't see that as a good idea. And so ultimately, what resulted out of the effort of having these community forums and meetings and allowing people to talk to each other and really understand one another was that legislation had to be written to ban pre-K to second grade suspension, which was a model that we adopted from other states in the United States that had recognized that there was a disproportionate rate of suspensions for African American children in public school systems. And so their solutions across other states was to ban pre-K to second grade suspension and offer restorative practices so the children can really learn the lesson rather than be suspended for 2 or 3 days, go home, hang out, play video games, take naps, and eat snacks, and then come back to school with the same behavior, rather than staying in school and learning how to redirect the behavior and properly address whatever conflicts they may have or issues they may have. And so we were able to, in 2023, through community efforts and bringing people together, draft not only the legislations, but provide comfort to those families and let them know that we will do something to offer those restorative practices. And we've got legislation passed to where the state of Nebraska no longer suspends pre-K to second grade students statewide. And that was one of the efforts that we did. But in that process, we were able to get parents in the room that saw each other for the first time and recognized that they weren't alone in their struggle. Because a lot of parents think that their child is, quote, bad when they're getting suspended or kicked out of school, and they feel so alone. And so when they got into the space of having town hall meetings and forums where they can have a conversation, they realized, well, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of other parents who are experiencing the same thing I'm experiencing. This is a systemic problem. It's not a me problem. And that was, building community for them.
It sounds like that was quite a meaningful development in the course of the work that you've been involved with. What are some other, when you look back, points along the way where it felt like meaningful change was created?
Man, it's been a few different things. So one of the I can just start from more current and go backwards. Like
Sure.
one of a big effort that I organized at the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation in 2018 was building a half-acre community garden for the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation. And taking that effort, we had about over 400 volunteers in a season, and our garden was built out of reclaimed concrete. So when someone had a driveway or a sidewalk destroyed, instead of that concrete going to the concrete recyclers, we had it dumped onto our empty land. And then we had a fun day where community could come out and use sledgehammers and bust the concrete up into smaller blocks. And then when it got into smaller blocks, we would lift it and stack it into dry stack garden beds, which were about 2 feet high. So individuals who were handicapped or individuals who were elderly or had maybe medical issues and couldn't bend too low to garden We were able to make raised garden beds, and we moved approximately 150,000 pounds of concrete total and stacked them into these dry stack garden beds and built a community garden and offered free gardening for all the community members in the surrounding area. So that was another effort where bringing community together and really building community and seeing the fruit of what it is to go from an idea of wanting to do a community garden to manifesting not only a community garden, but people working together and sharing knowledge to come to light.
Very cool.
And there's a glimpse of that in
Occasionally,
the documentary too, where we're talking about how we built the garden and gave people the seeds and things.
I've heard some libraries are even doing things like seeds of
Yeah,
all
seed
things.
exchange. Seed exchange, yes. You can check out seeds. You can go to the library, use your card, and especially in Omaha, and it starts about February, and you give them your library card, and they give you a packet of seeds, and you go grow.
Love that. All right. Now we were before the podcast began, we were talking a little bit about mental health, and that seems to be, in addition to external change in the world around us, there's also the internal mental space. And we mentioned like the idea of strengths. Like some people, they think they're bad, and especially as a kid, it's easy to pick that up as a narrative. And usually in those kind of contexts, people aren't also saying, and you have strengths. It's like
Right,
it kind
right.
of feels like as soon as they throw on the overarching label, then that kind of clears away all the positive side of things. And it's like uh we have strengths no matter what. And that's, I think that's kind of a foundation for some kind of a practical hope. And like I feel there's some kind of parallel between like self and community, that it's like progress, something better is possible. So I feel like I'm
Definitely.
in continuous development. I don't think there's ever a finish line, really. Anyways, so what is mental health meant in, or what have you seen? What does, how do you think about that as maybe like kind of a double effect, like the external change plus that internal world?
Yeah, one of the quotes that I use when I'm talking to my mentees or volunteers is, there is no self without community, and there's no community without self. They go hand in hand. Like for a child to believe they're bad, they have to be in an environment that reinforces that idea. And for a child to believe that they can achieve, they have to be in an environment that reinforces that idea. And sometimes that environment could be an environment without, or with minimal, I should say, quote, adult or older influences, and that child can achieve. Or that child could be surrounded by a sense of community, and individuals see them striving for something and encourage them to not only think for themselves, but to build upon their skill set in whatever way. And then there's children who grow up in environments where you have individuals around that child who constantly discourage them or tell them to be better or do better, or take away their ability to self learn and just constantly give them directives rather than them being able to discover. And all of those things reflect on that child's sense of self. I think when we come into the world, we naturally learn, we naturally want to grow, we naturally start to conquer, we naturally observe, and we naturally mimic. We naturally start doing the mirroring that we need to do in order to discover more about our own abilities from birth. And I think as time goes on, we start to run into the challenges, and depending on what our environment was like, can really shape who we are as we continue to grow and evolve. And so when we look at community and we look at the concept of mental health, it's an evolution of a process. And the older we get, the more we're processing things, the more we have to really understand where we sit in our environment. Another thing that I say that kind of keeps me grounded is, you've got to know who you are, where you are, and who you are to whom. So you have to know who you are, where you are, and who you are to whom. And that gives us a greater sense of self when we know who we are. Number one, our strengths, our weaknesses, our talents, etc. Where we are, that means environmentally, that means age, that means on the timeline of life, that means situationally, all of those things. And who we are to whom, which is who are the people around us and who are the people we interact with and who they see us as. Because as long as
Mm.
we understand those things, then we can have a greater sense of self. And when it comes to our mental health and our well being, we can be a lot more balanced in that. But when a person doesn't have those questions answered for themselves, or they're very, very vague on that, then we tend to go inside, and sometimes going inside our own head, we don't have some of the best answers at times. So we're not taught how to navigate the minefield of the mind.
Mm.
And navigating the minefield of the mind is a challenge all in and of itself if we've never been trained on how to navigate it. So I think there's a symbiotic relationship between self and community that is always going on, and we always have to check in on what's happening in our environment, what's happening in our community, and then what's happening in ourselves in order to truly assess, quote, our mental health. So when I think a person goes to therapy, I think that's a conversation where somebody comes in and joins you on the battlefield of the mind. And so therapy and good friends, a good minister or good counsel are the people who help walk us through that process.
Thank you. Yeah, that I love how succinct you can be with that. That would have taken me probably several days to Yeah. Yeah, tell what who if who have some of the difference makers been in your life? I saw a quote a Marshall Taylor
Mhm.
your remark here I see there is no reward in the work that we do it because it must be done. If you're looking for some type of reward, you'll find it in the work. The ability to serve the people is the reward. That sounds like a difference maker in your life. You could
Definitely.
okay, and then tell me about uh this person and anyone else who you felt was kind of formative in the who of Leo.
Man, there's so many, there's so many. It's very difficult to name all of them. That's why I say community is so important because there's so many people who have not only poured into me but taught me great lessons. Marshall Taylor being one of them. And Marshall Taylor is the owner or was the owner of the Afro American bookstore. And since he passed or transitioned, his significant other now runs the store. The Afro American bookstore is one of the very few black-owned bookstores in Northeast Omaha, just off of 33rd and Lake, and was once the home of the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation when it had no building. And so the Afro American bookstore was a place where if an individual is looking for a sense of identity, especially a person who identifies as a black person, they can go into the Afro American bookstore and learn about history, learn about culture. And Marshall Taylor was one of those people that I was introduced to where I got to really learn more about my history, my culture from an Afrocentric perspective. One of my early supervisors when I worked in fast food when I was like 16, Randy Boyd, he was a great mentor of mine because I had a job, but I also was young. I was also a teenager, and I'm also looking at what can I do in the streets to get respect and credibility. And Randy was the person that kind of kept my head on straight at work by having long dialogues and going through philosophy with me and challenging my train of thought and really showing me how to interact with people in a way that I hadn't experienced before, especially from an adult male. My father was in and out of my life growing up as a child because him and my mother separated when we were very young.
Hmm.
And so having mentors like Randy really helped fill in that gap. My father couldn't be there to fill in that gap. There's been
Hmm.
a lot of great people who've been in and out of my life. My third grade teacher, Mrs. Lutz, she was influential. She told me when I was in third grade I'd be a writer when I got older. I didn't believe her, but I since then have published a book earlier this year with Dr. LaDonna Griffin called The Grown Folks and the Magic Wand. And it was the book that birthed out of our efforts to get teachers and parents to build a better relationship so that there could be a benefit to the students and the children who are in the educational system. And so there's just so many people that I could name that we'd be on this podcast for another 48 hours if I just start telling stories of all the people who help influence and shape my worldview.
So, in addition to having difference makers in your own life, I saw you spotlight difference makers at a conversation. I thought it was going to be you and Lakeisha Green, the director of Union for Contemporary Art, talking and breaking down the film, My Omaha. But it was you basically passing the microphone to other people doing beautiful things in the community. That was
Yes,
awesome. So yeah, so yeah, it seems like that's also a part of your who Leo is someone who encourages other community builders. Tell me about that. What's that been like? It feels like passing it on.
definitely. Man, it's a great thing. I feel good about it. I always, when I get into a space, and it's like if I get to open the door, I want to bring other people in. You know, I was the guy who, and I still am the guy who gets invited to a gala and the tickets are like $75, and I'm going, well, how can I get my people who can't afford $75 to come in here?
Hmm.
You know, I just think that's so important because oftentimes we have conversations about people who are often not in the room to discuss it from their perspective, especially when we're in the room with difference makers who are who are policymakers, who are influential, and they're speaking on behalf of the people that they represent. However, the people that they represent would benefit from just being in the room, just being in the environment. That doesn't mean that they have to necessarily speak all the time. They just need to be in the environment, and that can change their perspective alone just by being in the environment and lifting them up. And so, at the time where I'm handed the microphone or I'm given the spotlight, of course I want to share it. And when My Omaha was released here in Omaha, like this is the best time to highlight some of the other people who would have either been in the film if the editor, didn't choose to cut out those scenes, or these are people who were behind the scenes of the work that is highlighted for me to be a part of, but really there's so many other people who were behind it that made that work possible. And so I just find great joy in making sure that people who go overlooked get recognized.
I love that. Yeah, I think there's something I want to say bringing out the best in others, and sometimes that's mutual, which I think of as a characteristic of like deep friendship. I know there's other things too. From the perspective of friendship, I've seen various on the studies side of things. I mean, it feels like common sense, but it's like I think there's a little bit of filling our own emotional well-being buckets from meaningful accomplishment, but I think it's even more so when friendship, positive relationships, the loose bumping into people in community is going well. What is a friendship mean to you, and if there's any friendships that you might be willing to spotlight, and no worries if not. But yeah, like tell me about friendship in Leo's life.
Uh, yeah, I think friendship is an interesting thing because first, with any friendship, you gotta learn you gotta learn yourself enough to learn another person. And that
Mm,
part in and of itself is difficult. Most people don't know enough about themselves to know another person. So in a friendship, especially in my world, in a friendship, if a person is still trying to figure out some very key things, not everything, but some very key things about themselves, oftentimes they have a difficult time with friendships because
mm,
they don't understand this person doesn't understand them, etc. Whereas if I know, like, when I'm tired, I get angry, if I know that when I get tired, I get angry, then I'm not going to blame anybody for when I'm tired and I'm trying to engage with them. Because I can
Mm,
say, I know I'm grumpy, I'm tired. And if I
mm,
can stop right there, then I can have a good friendship with the person, knowing that if things start getting tense and I know I'm tired, I can take the ownership of being tired and then, talk to them later or interact with them at another time. But then there are some times where I'm interacting with people who might not know themselves enough to acknowledge certain things, and then it doesn't work as far as having a friendship. But for me, I'm such a go person. I'm such a like community driven person that I get I can get misunderstood because of my ability to include people or want to include people, even sometimes at my own peril. But I would say one of the best friendships that I have is with my significant other, my lady, Nicole.
mm,
She was the one of the first people that I had a really deep and intimate friendship with by seeking to be better. Like I had some male friends and we were trying to be better, but we were still trying to figure ourselves out. And we didn't know exactly who we were. We were still discovering.
mm.
But when I met my significant other, we really did the deep work. And when I say deep work, I'm talking about fasting. I'm talking about going to church together. I'm talking about reading together, watching movies for the sake of having a genuine conversation, not just watching it to say, "Oh, that was cool. That was cool. You like it. I liked it too." And then ending it there,
Mm.
like actually having moments where we would stop talking and write down our thoughts and then exchange notebooks so that we can read them back and forth to each other and say, "Wow, I didn't know you thought about this. I didn't know you thought like that." And so doing that real deep work, that was the first person I really took that time to not only get to know myself with, but also listen enough to know her.
Beautiful. That's awesome.
Cool.
All
Thanks.
right. Um, what has the we kind of mentioned how the mental health and the activity kind of intersect, and it seems like there's been some intentional work, or is it there is some going on. One of the uh, projects that was mentioned that night is um, with Johnny No Good and the work that he's doing. And I know you mentioned yourself having been involved in some projects where mental health itself was somewhat the focus, like a mental wellness, kind of the upside, maybe a little bit on the healing side. Um, One of the things that I saw that sort of struck a nerve was that a report that some parts of the community there's higher than there should be rates of PTSD, like at the community level. There's and like the My Omaha film, it kind of ends on a note of looking at the hope, looking at the joy, and it's like, yes, both things coexist, like in in the same neighborhood, and it's like that everywhere, I think.
Yeah.
But you know, what has that sort of work been like, where the mental health itself is kind of the goal?
Yeah. In that space, like I said, for me, mental health is very much tied to the knowledge of self. It's tied to the understanding of who you are. And so for me, I'm always on a quest to create spaces where people can discover more about themselves, more about who they are, so that they can recognize the mental health successes and or challenges that they may have. And I think it again starts with the identification that, hey, I need to work on these things, or these are my strengths, as you mentioned earlier. And with these strengths, here are some ways I can use these strengths. When you have that sense of self enough to reflect in that way, then I believe you can accurately, or an individual can accurately address mental health and well being. But it really starts with that introspection. Like the danger that I see today that I'm a little concerned about is the conversation of mental health is becoming so popularized that we have a that it's becoming commonplace for everyday people to try to diagnose other people in
Mm.
in very loose terms. Like the word narcissist is being thrown around, which is really, really a wild term to throw around because to be a narcissist, to be clinically diagnosed as a narcissist, it's kind of a high level of diagnosis that needs to take place. But the average person is like, oh, that person's a narcissist. No, maybe they're selfish. That doesn't mean they're narcissists. So we just got to be careful when we're using these terms because not everybody knows what they mean. I don't even know what all the terms mean.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easy to overgeneralize and just throw a label on somebody.
Oh man, yeah, I got people who throw labels on themselves. Like, oh, I
Mm.
can't remember this. Don't blame it on me. Blame it on my ADHD. I'm like, have you ever gotten actually diagnosed or checked out? No, I just know I have ADHD. I can't pay attention for anything. Like, well, maybe you might want to just get checked out and see.
Indeed. Looking to the future, what do you see? Is there any intentional work, maybe whether it's begins with identification of a problem or not? I think sometimes there is something to benefit just by asking, like, what kind of world do we really want? And like, set aside problems, and what does that look like? I know, like, we can't actually decontextualize like that, or whatever version you would like to jump into. uh what would you like the future to be like, whether, and maybe both, like the world itself, and then what does the next version of Leo look like?
Ah, got you. Yeah, I think it's for me when I think about what do we want, what do I want the future to look like? Start with me is for me to ask that question would mean that for me would mean that I'm not satisfied with where I am, that there's more that I want. And that's not a bad thing. And I also think when we think about community, it would be the same type of question. What is the world we want? We would say, well, we're not there yet as far as what we want to see in the world, which means we're not satisfied with where we are. We made it this far and this is good, but it can be better.
Mm,
And so on either side of that question, whether it's me or it's generalized in community, I think it does indicate that the my needs may be met in this moment, but my desires are not. And so I have to acknowledge that. And I think as community members, we have to acknowledge that first, that we have desires for something even better. And so for me, what would be better is for not only myself, but people who identify as Black to really have the respect from a cultural standpoint to own, live, and exist in a cultural space that is truly cultural to myself and people that look like me. And when I say culture, I mean that in the most literal term of the definition of culture, because other groups of people, especially in this country, are allowed to operate in culture as it's defined by the term culture. Whereas for Black people, it's kind of been it's been more of the word that comes to mind is specter, like a ghost. It's something that is there, but it's not really there.
mm.
Whereas for other groups, culture exists in a very real place, such as traditions, language, norms and values, systems of governance, social organization, like the truest definition of culture. And I think for people like myself who are identified as Black, we're constantly on this life journey of trying to define what that means. So that's what it looks like for me is a future where that is not a journey anymore, that it is something that is already defined, is respected, and it has value in this society.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you so much. This is, I appreciate you being willing to be in that documentary. I appreciate you being willing to be on this podcast. And is there anything else you would like to share? If people want to learn more, where would you direct them?
Okay, yeah. If they wanted to, individuals wanted to know more about the work I do, they can go to my website, visionarylion.com. I also lend myself to a lot of other people's organizations and help them out. People want to know more about the Homeschool Cooperative, they can go to Leaders to Legends Academy.com. And there you could find the book that myself and Dr. Griffin co-wrote. If a person is looking to just get involved in community, they can always message me from my website from the work that I do. But I really think just moving forward, as the world shifts and society's kind of in a strange place, I encourage people to seek community, to seek out people who are like minded, seek out people who are kind at heart, and people who want to actually build real and true community in the simplest way. It doesn't have to be complex. If you want to join a pie making club, join a pie making club and enjoy the pie making club. And so anything that builds community, I think, is where we need to go moving forward.
It's been a pleasure, Leo. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Nick, thank you.